Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. I came actually by chance. I was in a conference in Chandigarh.
Could you speak to the mic which is being recorded?
Can you hear me?
No,
you want to record it?
It's getting recorded.
Oh, you're going to bind me to my word. Okay, so I better be careful. Okay, so I actually came here quite by chance. I was involved in a conference on crop residue burning in Chandigarh, and I met two very dedicated young ladies who I could see were very intent on doing things, and by that circumstance I was invited here to talk about soil, because I was sharing some experiences on the Punjab and what we were trying to do in the Punjab, and grappling with the subject matter of how you change habits, and particularly habits of farmers, which are more difficult to change, I think, than anything else in the world. And not because they're particularly bad, just because they need to survive like everybody else, and they're dealing with an environment which is solid matter, and it takes time to change. So it takes time for their habits to change, for them to be reassured about changing. Just this last talk that we had from Dr. Chanesh, I think it was, clearly the science is clear about everything. I'm not going to spend time on that. I just want to go straight into the subject matter of, we know the science, we know that we have to change our soils, we know we have to increase the organic carbon levels, we know it's a hydrological issue. So how the hell do we do it? That's really my concern, and that's the concern of the foundation that I work with, Naandi Foundation. So just let me, where do we turn this? Where's the, here. I think Sir Albert Howard said it years ago. It's all to do with the all-togetherness. I'm not going to repeat on that. So my issue is that it's not soil scientists and it's not policymakers that are going to rebuild our soils. It's communities. And I think that's the central issue I want, since I have around 5 minutes now. I just want to say that it's only communities, it's only people that are going to build the soils. And when I say communities, I'm talking about communities of people and communities of microbes. So how do you bring those two together? And this is something that we grappled with in Naandi Foundation, and we realized that in order to be able to get this to be done, we had to work with communities. So let me share some of these experiences. Naandi's vision, its stated vision from the time it was established in the late 1990s by a politician, Chandrababu Naidu. So we have got a political agenda. Luckily, he managed to leave us alone and do what we needed to do, because he knew that we'd do it better than if we had any political agenda. So it's to alleviate poverty and agrarian distress, particularly in the livelihood sphere. We also work in education as well. So our main objective is to empower communities and to establish viable agricultural systems. So we're primarily working with 3 areas. We chose the most difficult because that was the most challenging, is also the most rewarding. One is in the tribal area of the designated tribal area of Araku in Andhra Pradesh. Another one in Wardha, where all the suicide belt, as they call it, and the other one in the heart of the Punjab in Moga. I just wanted to share with you this. I tried to conceptualize what it would be to have an ideal world in agriculture. How do you bring everything together in order to facilitate a farmer to be concerned about his land, not just for the next 1 year, but for the next 20 years, so that when he hands it on to the next generation, it is better than when he found it. And I looked at this, and I kind of created this kind of amoeba, or soil microbe, if you like, with all the digestive system of it. You can look at it as a village, you can look at it as a single farm, like Mr. Murthy's. You can look at all those internal processes. It involves soils, it involves crops, livestock, biotic, abiotic elements. It involves time rhythms as well. And it involves people doing the things. Now, how do you integrate that? In order to change habits, you have to, they're connected to the outside world. And I think that's something that we learned from the Green Revolution, is that you change the habits of Indian farmers by facilitating markets. The Green Revolution happened by facilitating markets, by a buyback guarantee. What was flawed about it was the fact that it was based upon basically two crops, rice and wheat. So basically we changed the habits to monocultures. And we created monocultures as a result of that. And that's the tragedy. So my amoeba sort of tries to create an idea where every part of that ecosystem of the farm and the farmer is a stakeholder all the way through to the customer. So we have the stakeholders being customers, we have aggregated farmers in the form of co-ops and producer companies, as well as connecting to that individual farm, to that individual district, if you like, and to the point where you embrace the entire nation and you get an organization. One of the problems with the agricultural system as we have it in India and still in many parts of the world, that it's an unorganized sector. And we need to organize it, but we have to organize it organically. So in Araku, the first thing we did was we looked at all of the farming communities, some 500 villages that we're working with, as many as 30,000 farmers in these areas. And we did an assessment of what exactly were their assets. And to our surprise, there were considerable assets. There was a lot of livestock. It was a perfect scenario for creating very good agricultural systems. What was lacking was how to facilitate it, how to enable farmers to make their land systems better. And so we set about first, because the farmers came to us and said, look, you guys can think what you want, but if you want our children, particularly our daughters, to go to school, which was one thing that we were trying to facilitate, you better give us some money. And the only way we can get money is by working in, we have some coffee here, which we could grow. And we could grow it in the forestry areas, which the forest department has given. There was no forest there. As is very often the case with forest, it's designated forest or deemed forest, but no trees. So in Araku, you'll find all the bare spots in the Araku region is a desert. It's like bald hills. But everywhere where communities are working, there are trees. So that was one of our indications. So we started working in with coffee. Just to give you an indication of the sort of soil carbon, which I take soil carbon not as an indication of disease, but of a system, but really as a symptom of a disease, a bit like blood pressure, high blood pressure. You don't say that you've got a disease called high blood pressure. You see it as a symptom. And the fact that you've got low organic carbon landscapes is a symptom of a malaise. And so that's basically the stress that I wanted to put. And how to fix that? It's a lifestyle change that we need to look at. So these are the coffee areas that we started building from desert landscapes of the forest department. We managed to get putters for farmers, 1 acre putter each. And we started creating landscapes on the hills around the villages and started growing trees. And then we started getting the GPS mapping and everything just to indicate, you can see all the bare areas, those are all forest department. All the areas that are green looking belong to tribal farmers. Although the forest department blames the tribals for chopping the trees. So it's a rather an ironic situation. just to give you an indication, after we started working with coffee, the farmers started, their income started going up. I just came back from Paris. We now have the cooperative of farmers has actually established a coffee shop in the heart of Paris, in the Marais. And we're selling the coffee there at around 7,000 rupees per kg to direct to customer. And we're able to bring that money back to farmers and guarantee that they have a viable source of income. Now this is, to my mind, the clue of how we can go about it. Connecting to markets, direct access to markets where every part of the chain of passing on that crop, there is a stake in it. There's a stakeholder, and those stakeholders are interested in quality. We would never 10 years ago be able to sell our coffee in Paris because the quality was so bad. But then we created cooperatives, large-scale cooperatives, started processing the coffee scientifically. We started working with the soils, building the soil microbes, getting quality coffee, and getting experts in, and every one of those people is a stakeholder. That is what I mean by communities. It's not just communities of farmers, but it's communities of everybody else. So here's Ramarao's empty plot back in 2010. Over a process of planting trees in that 1 acre, and of which we have 15,000 of these plots, we started building up to a point where we had a tree landscape, where you had multiple incomes in that 1 acre. And there are 15,000 of these plots there. Every one of those farmers is doing their job. When I first started in 2010, the farmers, after having a successful income in coffee, they said, hey, now we want to re-establish our forest because forest is sacred to us. So I scratched my head and I said, how are we going to plant all of these trees? So when I was asked to go in 2010 for the first planting of the trees, we went into a bare area of degraded land. It was in May, very hot. And the soil was very, very dry, and I was to break the earth, so to speak, for the first tree to be planted. So I started digging, and I had around about 300 or 400 very enthusiastic farmers. The particular owner of that 1 acre plot was completely drunk, and he was having a grand time. And so I broke the earth, and everyone clapped, and then everyone kept watching, and I dug. And I was digging a hole for a mango tree because they loved mangoes. So I kept digging, and it was like a 2 cubic foot a hole. That is to say 2 feet by 2 feet by 2. That means 8 cubic feet of soil. Anyone who's dug a pit for a tree in the middle of May in India before the monsoon knows what it is to dig a hole. So I was digging this hole, and everyone was just kept on clapping and clapping and clapping. So I spent this rigorous time, and I've been using my hands, not so much in farming of recent, mostly in these lectures and things. So I started feeling the blisters coming, and I was saying, oh, this is like going back a few years. And finally, at the end of the digging of this pit, I thought, oh God, if they're not going to help me out, then how are we going to plant all these millions of trees we planned? At the point I finished, everyone clapped, grabbed their instruments, and ran off into the 1 acre and started digging all the designated pits for all of this food forest that we wanted to create. And I think that was a signal moment for me. And I said, wow, if they're so enthusiastic after I just did that one pit, I think there's a future. And we haven't stopped planting since. At the moment, it's 8 million trees, including forest trees, timber trees, but mostly food forest trees, mangoes, and all the other fruits that are necessary to build the nutrition for the community. I have 1 minute, I think.
Yes.
So then I go on to, this is a landscape, as you all know, from Warta. It was a beautiful area, fantastic soils a few years ago. Then along came cotton, and then came BT cotton, and basically we created a monoculture of disaster. And the monoculture of disaster was not just for the farmers, but it was also for the the soil and the soil microbes. Alarmingly low levels of organic carbon levels. It's like an icy ward, every one of them. Nothing ever gets over 0.5 generally. The irony is that the department, the soil science department, really doesn't quite know what is high, low organic carbon. On the one hand, they say what is low can be at 0.2, but then when you go across to Amravati, which is contiguous with Varta, you see the low there is 0.76 to 1.25. So even within the agricultural department itself, there's confusion about what is good. It's like having blood pressure at like 160 over 90 and saying, it's okay, relax. This is the same thing, and this is the agricultural department. It's quite amazing. It's quite astonishing. And when I questioned the farmers, the soil scientists, they said, well, no, because it was so low in Varta, we had to raise the bar a little bit. That's the mentality of things, you know, if it's bad, don't tell it's bad, just kind of cover it up. So there we worked with, we didn't want to work with cotton, we didn't want to do that at all. We decided that we wanted to experiment to see whether we could create horticulturalists out of a landscape where there were no trees anymore. So we started with pomegranates. And this is like 2 years old now. We've got pomegranates coming on the market. And in between the intercultivation, the whole ecosystem gets richer and richer. So this is what was amazing was we created drip irrigation systems for the farmers. We have a long way to go with that to raise these organic carbon levels up to make it a sustainable system. But it's happening. And farmers are extremely interested in learning what it is to be an orchardist. And that was what we wanted to do. We wanted to create a disruption in that area to say, hey, you don't have to depend year on just an annual crop. You can do something that's a perennial crop, and you can also have food crops as well, because every farmer has a minimum around 8 acres. So he can easily spare 1 to 2 acres for his fruits. So you look at I'll just take 30 seconds and finish this. You look at the levels of this here, it's extremely alarming. Our baseline was extremely low, and it's extremely low in that what we all know is the vast treeless cereal landscape of Punjab. There we decided we would facilitate the farmers not to burn their crop residue. So we set up a composting factory, if you like, on an organic farm, on a biodynamic farm, and we literally bought all the crop residue last year. We bought more than about 1,200 tons of crop residue, which would otherwise have polluted Delhi and shut down Delhi for maybe an extra couple of days. And this is what we did. We mechanized, we made it easy. And we wanted to demonstrate to the Punjabi farmer that FYM does not equal compost, that we have to talk about microbes, colonies of microbes, communities of microbes, and only then can we facilitate the farmer to be able to switch from a chemical-based system to something microbial and soil-friendly and people-friendly. So there is the compost factory. We are pledged to buy every bit of crop residue that may have been burned and converted to valuable compost for the farmer. These are the statistics. It's alarming. Punjab, just to take the organic carbon alone, we were talking about some places where you'll see up in the high points there, farmers putting farmyard manure. They've managed to maintain it, still below 1%, but there we are. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for an interesting story of your journey. Now I request Gurpreet.
Yes.
Myself, Dr. S.K. Chauhan. My question to the panel is this. I I am a supporter of the natural farming, no doubt, because nature plays its own role within the ecosystem. But if suppose some deficiency of one particular element is there in the soil, and that cannot be replaced by natural means. So how can we use the natural these elements for that to compensate the deficiency of that particular element in that soil?
For me, yeah.
Okay, Gopalji. I think that should be the last question. I think then we can get into answers.
This is a very complex, and the more I'm hearing, I'm getting more confused. I want to ask each of the panel members, what is another point's view that you want to build in what you are doing? Don't tell me what you are doing, but tell me what is the other person. You have heard 6 of them, right? So let the 7th guy tell me what of one of them do they pick as a takeaway, as something that they would like to add on, because that's how we have to progress. You know, each doing our own good stuff is God's work, fine. But you know, when you are talking of something like this, what have you learned? So that then I can then say, okay, this is how I can sort of, you know, because I'm learning.
Yeah, thanks, Gopal. I think it's a very good question. Yeah, I would now request the panelists to be.
But yes, let the other members of the panel also respond to the.
Maybe I can first address your confused or confusing question. Frankly, maybe it's because I'm a farmer at heart. I can see the consensus in all of the views that we put. So I don't see any confusion. So maybe you can take a specific point, but maybe I'll take one point which I found interesting, which could be considered to be conflicting, and that's to say the approach of in situ composting, that's to say mulch composting, versus taking the crop residue out, composting it and putting it back again. And I agree there's differences of approach, and I don't think that they necessarily conflict. I think there's a period of transition where we can go to. I think initially I feel when you look at urban areas, for instance, you need to take that waste and you have to compost it, and you have to get it somehow and get it back into the farming community. So I think that's one example. Another example is where you've got a dire situation where you've got crop residue burning, and you've got Punjabi farmers who all they want to do is just take that stuff and burn it so that they can plant their next crop. They're like in this frenetic sort of activity. They need to do that sort of thing, and we have to facilitate a system of farming where they don't need to. So those are the kinds of things that have to be worked out on many different levels, whether it's in governance, whether it's at the local community level, whether it's in the science and technology. So I don't think that any of, at least personally, I let the others speak for themselves, I don't think any of the presentations here were necessarily conflicting. And I found Amar's presentation wonderfully corroborative of our approach. We deal with larger, it's not just one plot, we deal with up to 30 to 50,000 farmers, so it's different from that sort of thing. You cannot get a concentrated activity and such spectacular results as, let's say, you have with Kailash. But when you're dealing with large numbers, sometimes it's suboptimal in the approach. But at the same time, in terms of numbers and scale, it's very important to do that. So that's my answer, and maybe you can make your comment further and maybe specify some particular thing that was conflicting, that bothers you or confused you.
No,
then I could.
the whole thing.
I think Gopalji, the time
Somebody
is.
has to say what's your priority. I just pick his idea. I think I want to bring it on my menu. That's all I'm trying to see.
No,
What?
the question is very different. See, whether you want to identify our ethics of what I have understood or what I don't want to.
Okay, I can just make this one point. What I found interesting, I'll just finish this one second. What I found interesting in the whole thing was Amar's approach of measurement, and that for me was very interesting.
That's all.
One thing that we don't do enough of in our thing, we just want to do in numbers. So I think that approach was very good. in order to go to governance, to go to the local communities and convince people?
Gopal, I'll answer that because I have learned a lot from Kailash, not just today, but it probably